So we are in the fourth week of our small groups in our series based on the book Daring Greatly, next one by Brene Brown. And Brene is a professor, and her specialty is research. And so she has spent years and years and years researching what we are talking about today. And so Daring Greatly, if we can go on to the next thing. So this is Daring Greatly, and this really is Daring Greatly. The courage to be vulnerable, to show up and be seen, to ask for what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, and to have the hard conversations. And so she says daring greatly is getting into the arena. You know, it's really stepping outside of all of these facades that we haven't even necessarily been aware of in our lives, and really stepping out into our true essence, our true being. And so this has to do with authenticity. And so our mission statement here is to encourage and inspire spiritual and personal growth by empowering each other to be authentically all that we came here to be. And I love that mission statement because when we are truly being authentic, we are being the most beautiful expressions of the Christ, or the most beautiful expressions of God that we can be. And so everything else falls under that. So here's what Brene says about authenticity. Authenticity is cultivating the courage, this is a big one, to be imperfect, to set boundaries and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. It is exercising the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of strength and struggle, and know that we are all made of strength and struggle. And it's nurturing the connection and sense of belonging that can only happen when we believe that as we are right now, that we are enough. Now, we talked about in the last weeks that vulnerability is not a weakness. In fact, it takes great courage to move into being vulnerable, into letting ourselves be seen. And last week we talked about the title was called Shame Off You. And she took shame and she took guilt and she put them side by side. And essentially she said shame is when we're saying I'm bad, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy. And guilt is when we're saying, I could have done this better. Or, in hindsight, maybe I would do this differently. Huge difference. And so we want to move out of this whole experience of shame because it diminishes who we are. It diminishes us. So she defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. How many of us like to have our emotions exposed? Isn't it so fun? But here's what she says too, that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. Those sound like pretty good things, don't they? So the chapter that we're in, she is talking about the vulnerability armor. And this was a really long chapter. And so she talked about a lot of different shields and armor. But I'm going to focus on the main three that she talked about today. And so I've got some props that I thought may best represent each of the three that I'm going to talk about. So we're going to go to the first one, which is foreboding joy. So to me, foreboding joy looks something like this. And it's that thing where, we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. We're in this place of just saying, this can't last. This is too good to be true. And so in a very real sense, we are pre-painting something that hasn't even happened yet. And let me ask you something. How do you like me speaking behind this mask? Because you can't connect with me. Because I have my foreboding joy armor on, my foreboding joy mask on. So this is what foreboding joy is about. Now, she goes on to say that people say they're most vulnerable when, and these are things that will take us into that foreboding joy. So people are most vulnerable when standing over my children while they're sleeping, acknowledging how much I love my husband or wife, knowing how good I've got it, loving my job, spending time with my parents, watching my parents with my children, thinking about my relationship with my boyfriend or girlfriend, getting engaged, going into remission, having a baby, getting promoted, being happy, and falling in love. And so Brene shares a story about a man that was in his 60s, and he said that all his life, he thought the best thing that he could do was to prepare for the worst. And so he would just always think of the worst possible things that would happen so that he wouldn't be blindsided when and if something did happen. Well, eventually, his wife got killed in a car wreck, and he said none of that preparation helped at all for the experience of losing his wife when she died. And he said, and actually what he realized was because he was always in this place of preparing for the worst, that he wasn't in the present moment, and he wished that he had been more aware of being in the present moment with his wife instead of always worrying about things. And I think that's really something for us to look at, because even on this list of things, we can so easily get caught up again in what I call prepainting, and that is bringing pain to the present moment that doesn't even exist yet. And probably it's not going to happen. And so we take away from our present moment experience. Brene says that scarcity and fear are what drive foreboding joy, because what? We're afraid that the joy is not going to last. We're afraid that there won't be enough. We're afraid that of that transition to disappointment that we might feel. How many of us have felt struggle in our lives? And so when the idea here is that no matter what vulnerability mask you put off, it's not going to keep the struggles from happening in your life. You cannot control every event in your life. And so it's coming back into the present moment. So what is the spiritual remedy for foreboding joy? And what she says is it's practicing gratitude, appreciation. And, for me, that's bringing ourselves fully into the present moment. Now, Brene talks about in her book wholehearted living. When she talks about daring greatly, she talks about really being in the arena of life and letting ourselves be seen, putting ourselves out there. That we're going to take some risks in life, and that we may fall sometimes, and there may be people that are saying things about us, but still that we're willing to get in to the arena. And so, one of the things that she talked about with her participants was that their ability to stay in joy, whatever was going on, was that they practiced gratitude. And they literally had practices. It wasn't something where they just had a sense of gratitude, but they would have gratitude journals, or they would, I love the idea of having a gratitude jar. I've heard this before, and putting something every day into this gratitude jar. And then at the end of the year, you can just go through it and look at how blessed your year was. Or having, time at dinner to talk about your gratitudes, or just being in absolute appreciation of what is now. Because you know what, you guys, we have a lot to appreciate, don't we? Most of the time, when we're in foreboding joy, we're really okay in this present moment. And we really have all that we need in this present moment. And so we come back into this present moment in deep appreciation for how blessed we are and for what is in our lives and of course, in nature and all around us. Her participants said that there was a distinction between happiness and joy. Happiness was tied to outside circumstances. But joy, they said, thought of joy as a spiritual way of engaging with the world that's connected to practicing gratitude. And that, we've talked about this deep and abiding sense of joy. And happiness is an effect of that. But that this deep abiding joy, and here's the tough part for us sometimes, comes from being in gratitude and appreciation no matter what's happening in our lives. And even that some of the challenges that come up, because the reality is that we're going to have tremendous growth, whatever it is that we're going through. But that deep abiding joy doesn't always look like, whoa, I'm so happy. It's something so much deeper that helps us to get through those times that are kind of difficult for us. Okay, so the next shield, and I thought about, well, what would I use for this next shield? The next shield is perfectionism, and for me, it looks like this. Everything in my life is so perfect. I do everything perfectly, and I don't ever want anybody to see that I may not be doing everything perfectly, because I've been taught that in my life I need to make sure everything is perfect and everything is sunshiny. It just feels so good. Can you connect with me when I have that up there? Can you relate to it? Yeah, this is my thing. Perfectionism is definitely my thing. And in fact, so much so, you guys, yesterday, I'm working on my PowerPoint with perfectionism. And I look at my little shield and I'm like, oh, it's not perfectly centered. I didn't touch it after that, because I was not going to care. And the thing is that you guys would never notice that unless you're a perfectionist like I am. I know you're looking. See? Perfectionists know. I don't really care. So in interviewing people who were living this wholehearted and engaged life, she asked them 2 questions. Is perfectionism an issue for you? And if so, what are your strategies for managing it? Well, here's the thing that happened. She said in all her years of collecting data on wholeheartedness, she never heard one person attribute their joy, success, or wholeheartedness to being perfect. And she said, in fact, there was one clear message. Cindy, if you go on. The most valuable and important things in my life came to me when I cultivated the courage to be vulnerable, imperfect, and self-compassionate. Perfectionism is not going to lead us to the life that we truly desire to live. In fact, perfectionism is actually like a hazard in our pathway, in our journey. Her definition of perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels the primary thought. If I look perfect and I do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. And as a person that deals with perfectionism, I can tell you it does not keep you from experiencing any of those things. And the reason that perfectionism is really something that we have to look at is because perfectionism is an unattainable goal. Because perfectionism is based on perception. And every single person in this room has a different idea of what's perfect in all different kinds of things. And if we live our life trying to be perfect enough to be accepted by all the people in our life, we are going to go crazy, because every single one will have a different perception of what perfection is. And so it's really, okay, so what's the antidote? The antidote to moving from what will people think to I am enough, she says, begins with shame resilience, self-compassion, and owning our stories. That we have to be willing to appreciate the cracks in our lives. And so last week, Stowe and Karen were here, and they shared the story of the cracked pot. And so I want to share this with you. And I heard just a little bit different version of the story. But the story is that there's a woman, and she's got this big pole on her shoulders, and she's got 2 pots on either side. And she walks down every day, and she gets water in these pots. And then she turns around, and she walks back along this path. And the pot on the right doesn't have any cracks, but the pot on the left has some cracks in it. And so by the time she gets back to where she wants the water, this pot only has about half the amount of water. This pot has the full amount. Well, the story is that the cracked pot feels ashamed. And, is saying, wow, every day, you go and you fill me up, but every day by the time we get back, I only have a half of a pot of water. And the woman said to this cracked pot, but have you ever noticed the walkway? And the cracked pot said no. And so she said, notice that because of you, as we turn to walk this way, there are flowers all along this side of the pathway because you water that every single day. And I think that's such a great analogy for us in our own lives. And you know what, you guys? You can call yourself a crackpot now. Isn't that great? And you can even say somebody else is a crackpot, and it will be a loving thing that you can say. I wouldn't actually say it to their faces, but but it's a knowing. I love the scripture that says, "Be ye perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect." And don't be in the world, be in the world, but not of this world. And it's saying to us that our perfectionism, our perfection lies in who and what we are in this moment, because we are all expressions of God. And that's the perfection right there. And that it's so important for us to get past. And I know most, if not all of us, still have those things in our lives that we have felt ashamed about, or that we haven't wanted somebody to see those cracked parts of us. And yet those cracked parts, and I love, because we had somebody in Soulful Saturday yesterday say that they were having a really hard time with the whole, shame aspect of things, and that she had the opportunity to be in conversation with somebody, and she shared a story that she had only shared with one other person. And so she was vulnerable enough to share this story. And she said, and as soon as she shared it, that this person that she was with said, "Oh my God, I am so glad that you shared that, because I had an experience similar to that." And yet we don't want to share our stories about these aspects of our lives because we're so afraid of being judged. And let me say again, because Brene says this, it's not that we go and we share our stories with everybody. That's not what this is about. This is about finding the people in our life, and I like how she says it, that have earned our trust, to be able to sit down with them and to say, I did this thing today and I felt really ashamed of it. And I don't remember what I did the other day, but I was telling you about it, and it was so great because I was able to say, "Oh my God, I was so embarrassed." I remember now, after this thing came out of my mouth. I'm not sharing it with you guys. Not that you haven't earned my trust, but I'm embarrassed about it. But it just came out of my mouth. But being able to go to Paul and just say, "Oh my God, this happened, and I feel really bad about this," and him just being able to be with me in that and help me just to be able to say it and know that I wasn't a bad person, for saying that. I was a crackpot at that point. So Gretchen Rubin, from the author of The Happiness Project, says and I love this. This I think will resonate. "I remind myself, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. A 20-minute walk that I do is better than the 4-mile run that I didn't do. The imperfect book published is better than the perfect book that never leaves my computer. And the dinner party of takeout Chinese food is better than the elegant dinner that I never host." Resonate with any of that? Yeah. And isn't it great? It gives us permission to say, wow, don't set this standard up that it has to be this certain way or I can't do it because it won't be perfect enough. Let whatever it is be enough. Okay, the third shield is numbing. And this just feels like numbing to me. Just numbing. And so numbing is things like being crazy busy. It's the sugar. It's the prescription pills. It's 4 shots of espresso. It's drinks after work to take the edge off. It's eating, sleeping, watching too much TV, being on Facebook too much, being on our phones all the time. Those things can definitely be numbing behaviors. And if we're in this numbing behavior, can you connect with me? No, you can't connect with me, and I cannot connect with you. And so Brene says that the most powerful need for numbing seems to come from the combination of shame, anxiety, and disconnection. And here's what she says about it. And this one is definitely I can resonate with. Shame enters for those of us who experience anxiety because not only are we feeling fearful, out of control, and incapable of managing our increasingly demanding lives, but eventually our anxiety is compounded and made unbearable by our belief that if we were just smarter or stronger or better, we'd be able to handle everything. Anybody relate to that? Because, we are superheroes and we can do it all. So just look at that. The second thing is with disconnection, it's a similar story. We may have a couple of hundred friends on Facebook. We may have a slew of colleagues, real life friends and neighbors, but we feel alone and unseen. And feeling this disconnection always creates pain. But when we feel disconnected, coupled with the shame of believing that we're disconnected because we're not worthy of connection, it creates pain that we want to numb. And that is absolutely true. So the antidote to numbing, and she says 3 things. One is learning how to actually feel our feelings. Whoa, that's a big one, isn't it? Like instead of pushing them away, feeling our feelings. The second one is staying mindful about numbing behaviors. And the way that she says to do this is what's worked for her, is looking and saying, am I having this drink after work because it's pleasurable to me? Or is there something else going on underneath that I'm just really not facing? And then the third one is learning how to lean into the discomfort of hard emotions. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to read the rest of this chapter. This book has been so amazing and so important for our journey in life itself and for what we want to see in our world. And that's, that we can become so authentic within ourselves that we don't have to make somebody else wrong for who they are, for what their beliefs are, for how they show up in our world, and that we model that. We model that for the people around us. So I was thinking about David and Goliath, and I was thinking how, I love that the stories can represent anything. And I thought, with Goliath, here he is, he's this ginormous man. He's huge. And Goliath is always used to winning. Goliath is, he doesn't wear any armor because he doesn't do vulnerability. Vulnerability? It's weakness. He doesn't do it. He's a man's man. Oh, yeah. And he's not going to feel any feelings because that's you're being a sissy. And so he goes out there and he has no vulnerabilities. And then here's David. And David's maybe in his late teens, early 20s. And David comes out now. Every person that has gone before David has worn this really heavy armor because they felt too vulnerable. They couldn't own themselves. But then here comes David, and David goes out there and he is totally vulnerable. He has no armor on. He has no shield. He's letting himself be seen. I'm sure that others were making fun of him, like, who do you think you are? You're a scrawny little thing, and you're going out there and you think you're going to beat the giant? And so David goes out there and he's just his authentic beingness. And what does he do? He takes a slingshot with a rock right between the giant's eyes, and he kills the giant. And so I think it's important for us to look that, with the giant, yeah, he did have some vulnerabilities, but he would not look at them. And where we may be not willing to look and see that we might have some vulnerabilities. Because when we know what they are, we can make them strengths in our lives. And then we have David, who comes out there, and David shows us the power of being vulnerable, the power of being authentic. And that's our journey. And so when we look at the care and feeding of our spirits, it's getting back to this place where we move into self-love and self-worth and self-acceptance, that we move out of disconnection and comparison. And we recognize that because I am here on this planet, and I have come forth from God, I am Godness expressing, that I matter. And who I am and how I am and all the experiences that have brought me to this point, they matter, and they have made me who I am today. And I can love all of it, and I can love myself. And to me, that really is one of the main journeys in our life. Because when we can truly love ourselves, and when we can truly have this worthiness within ourselves, our connection with other people is so deep and so authentic. And I'm going to tell you, the best relationships in your life are the relationships that are authentic. the relationships that are real. The relationships, I was thinking about with my first marriage, we were married for like 26, 27 years. And I remember that one of the things for me that was so frustrating was I just want to be seen and loved for who I am. I just want to be seen and loved for who I am. And it wasn't until after I left that marriage that I realized, I guess I probably should have shown up as me if I wanted to be seen and loved for who I am. And I did the best I could at the time, but I was trying to be who I thought he wanted me to be. So he couldn't love me for who I was. And so just be aware of that. Okay, so we're going to end today with the 4 affirmations that will lead up until this point. And so the first one, we're going to do this one 3 times. And we're going to put the emphasis on I, then we're going to put the emphasis on am, and then we're going to put the emphasis on enough. And I'm going to invite you to own this as you say it, okay? I. Together, I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. Now let's go on. I bravely open myself to life and love. I allow myself to be seen and celebrate who I am. I invite every moment to reveal my good. And so it is, and so it shall be. Now, next week, my daughter and I are doing our second annual mother-daughter Diva Dash in Branson, which is a 5K. And so Chaz Wesley is going to be here. And so, yay! He is... He's going to finish out our series, so I invite you to be here because Chaz is always so amazing. But I invite you to take this with you and to let this be your mantra, because I promise you that, God's desire is for you to live your most amazing and your best life. But you have to be willing to let yourself be seen in order to do that. So, namaste. Namaste.